So let's, I'd love to talk to you about, so you worked in a bookstore. I kind of read through your bio on your website, and you worked in a
Yeah.
bookstore and you met a lot of people that kind of helped,
hmm
like you talked to them about the business, you learned some of the business side of things.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? And then what were some of the things that you learned through that process?
It's hard to quantify. It's also so long ago now, what I learned.
Hmm.
So working at Galaxy, which is still around today, it's not in its own store anymore. It's owned by another independent bookshop, Abbey's, and it's inside Abbey's separately, but as its own thing. But we used to have our own store, and I'm no longer there. It's not a we anymore. And they would it had built its business on importing to Australia books, fantasy and science fiction books that weren't readily available in Australia from the US market, because most of our stuff comes from the UK market. Not so much these days, times have changed a lot, but certainly before the advent of Amazon and things like that, a lot of the writers who were published by Door didn't particularly get picked up by UK publishers, which meant they didn't get seen in Australia, as an example. Even some of the Del Rey, like some of the bigger Del Rey authors, would be picked up in the UK, but not all of them. So there was a lot of stuff like that was brought over. But being a specialist shop, we got to local authors would come in frequently. Over my time, I met Sarah Douglas, who unfortunately is no longer with us, Karen Miller, Jennifer Fallon, Trudy Canavan, Ian Irvain. I haven't met in person Tony Shillito, but I spoke to him quite a bit. He's in South Australia, so a bit far away. So a lot quite well-known fantasy authors. Fiona McIntosh, who's gone on to a lot of stuff with crime fiction now, but still has her fantasy series. We also got to meet George R. R. Martin when he came to Sydney, Robin Hobb, Richard Morgan, people like that. So working in a specialist store, a few of the writers, I worked as a beta reader for Jennifer Fallon as a reader of science fiction fantasy, and she reached out and she was looking for more male perspectives from readers. So I did that with her. I also did that for Karen Miller, who has become a really good friend. And just being on the other side of the manuscript writing process and seeing an author's manuscript finished and talking to them about the story and giving feedback and listening to them, just interacting with them on what they can do differently, or ideas they get from listening to feedback, just showed me a different side of the writing process. I mean, I guess I never went to university or studied writing as a career path, or as something, or as further education. I didn't do creative writing at university or studied English literature or anything like that. It's all self-taught. And I guess in some ways, I probably had this idea in my head that you write the manuscript and then it's done. You might rewrite it a couple of times, but I had no real depth of understanding as to the different sorts of processes or the things that you need to look at in terms of character development and story structure and the beats of story, and what you want to hit and how to do all of that. So getting to work with these writers opened my eyes to that. And as well, working at Galaxy, one of the things we would do is we would read books and review. And the reviews could never be just, oh my God, it was amazing, it was so good, you need to read it. You need to talk about, like, why was it so good? Why did it work for you? And if it didn't work for you, and giving a negative review is fine, but justify why it didn't work for you. Explain. It's not just like this writer doesn't know how to write and it's been done before and better. And it's like, well, cool, maybe it has, but, talk about where you're coming from with those things. So learning to critique and critiquing for beta reading helped me a lot in being able to critique my own stuff to advance it from a first draft stage to a second or third or fourth draft before I then passed it out to third parties to have a look at and give me So rather than writing courses and I guess learning that sort of stuff in writing courses, I kind of learnt it on the fly, working in a bookstore where I interacted with professional authors and editors, because HarperCollins Voyager was just starting, well, not just starting up, well, it kind of was just starting up. And they had one editor at HarperCollins in Sydney, Stephanie Smith, she spearheaded Voyager in Australia. And their offices ended up being a couple of streets away from where we were in the city of Sydney. So I got to meet Stephanie, I got to talk to her, and I got to talk to the HarperCollins people a lot as well. So just getting to know that side of the business, the marketing and what what the editors do and what they're looking for at the time, this was many years ago now, was just seeing that side of the business was pretty eye-opening as well.
I like what you're saying about reviews. I've done some reviews on my YouTube channel, but I'm a very slow reader, so it ended up not being like super viable for me to keep doing that. But what I always tried to do, even for books I really, really loved, I always tried to do kind of like 5 things I liked, 5 things I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Like keep it, because there's nothing is perfect. You know, even in the classics, Lord of the Rings. Like Lord of the Rings is not a, no one panic, but like Lord of the Rings is not a perfect book. And so I always tried to, because I think I like, even with the things that are almost, even if you love them, there's still some things that maybe aren't great. But even books that you don't like, well, they're not complete. Like there's still some good things in there. So I think it's always good and fair to pick, and I think readers want that. They want to hear. They don't want to just hear like, oh, it was amazing and it was so great. Like that's not a review,
Yeah. One of the Aussie authors that I did work with as well, Glenda Lark, one of the things she always said is that she loved reading, not particularly about her own work, but she liked negative or 1-star reviews, because she would often find that the things that the reviewer was saying that they didn't like about the book sounded interesting to her. So she'd be like, oh, I actually want to read this now and see if it's as interesting as it sounds. So that's always something to keep in mind. One man's trash is another man's treasure. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it can be the same with books.